And welcome back, Fourth and Long fans. It's your footy correspondent, Coach Donnie Hess here, back with another off-season supporter chat. And ladies and gentlemen, I cannot wait for this chat. I've been going back and forth with this gentleman. We've had a few scheduling issues, but finally, we were able to connect. Mr. Tim Newman. Tim, thank you for joining me today.
Not a problem, Donnie. Thanks very much for having me. As you said, we've had some interesting times recently, just trying to find a time that would work with sick little ones. But finally, we've organised it, which is good.
Fantastic. But before we get to the footy, I always like to kind of find out just a little bit about the person that I'm chatting with outside of footy. So just real quick synopsis of who you are and who you are away from the game of football.
I'm a primary school teacher. So this year I'm going to be teaching year 3 at a new school. So I've changed schools during the off season as such. And I'm a dad of 2 little daughters. So I've got Evie and Penny. So Evie's about to start her first year of school this year, which is exciting and scary as a parent. And then I've got Penny, who's 2.5.
Awesome. So let's jump into it again. This is a footy podcast, so we're going to talk mostly footy. Let's kind of go with your early days. What is your favorite thing about the sport of football?
I just love the atmosphere. So heading off to the games, I grew up in Sydney. So being a Hawthorn supporter growing up in Sydney, I got to see them once a year, but Dad always bought a membership for us. So we'd sit down with the cheer squad. And for all those people who know anything about the AFL cheer squads, full of nuffies, as we'd call them here, some very interesting people. And that was my experience. And just being around like-minded people was wonderful. And even to this day, when I take the girls, our membership's got us down about 6 rows from the front at the MCG, which is perfect for that atmosphere and being there. And I think for me, that's the best thing about being at the football, is that atmosphere that you can't replicate anywhere else.
Yeah, completely agree with that. So let's go back into the recesses of your memory just a little bit. Can you remember your earliest footballing memory?
So the earliest memory I actually have is it's a Hawthorn loss, and it was 1996 in an elimination final at the SCG against the Swans. And I think Hawthorn lost by a goal from recollection. So I would have been 7 at the time. And I remember it because we'd beaten Melbourne the week prior, where Jason Dunstall had kicked his 100th goal for the season. And then the old man had forked out money to take me to go to the final, which was wonderful, because at that stage it was, no, that's only something that Dad would go to. But then, Mum and Dad had a discussion and I was able to tag along, which was wonderful as a 7-year-old, being at this, big game that didn't mean much to me, I guess, at the time. But going off now, and what's that, 27 years ago, still something that's in the memory bank.
Fantastic. You kind of said it a couple of times, but for anybody that might have missed it, what's your AFL club and how is it that you come to support them?
So I'm a Hawthorn supporter, and how I came to support them is interesting. So my dad grew up in Sydney in the 1960s, and at that stage there was no Sydney teams, because it was called the Victorian Football League. And he was having a look one day, and one of the players from his rugby league team, which was St George, was called Phil Hawthorn. And so Dad went, well, Phil Hawthorn plays for St George, so Hawthorn will be my VFL team. And from that moment on, we've just supported them. And then we found out, obviously, Dad was born in 61, which was Hawthorn's first ever premiership. I was born in 89, where Hawthorn won a premiership. And my sister was born in 1991. Hawthorn won a premiership. So it just happened to be.
That is a cool statistic, rather eerie, but rather cool. That is absolutely fantastic. So your dad picks Hawthorn. So would you say that Hawthorn is a family club, or are there other people in your family that kind of have chosen other footy clubs?
Yeah, Hawthorn would be the family club. Mum wasn't really into Aussie rules as such. And then where they live out in Sydney now is near where the GWS Giants are. So Mum started working at some of the Giants games and became a bit of a Giants fan. And then when my 2 daughters were born, Mum has converted to Hawthorn. So she's now a Hawthorn supporter, and same as my wife. My wife was a St Kilda supporter when we first met, but she'll go to more Hawthorn games with the girls now, and seems to get into it, which is wonderful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So, a fun family club there for sure. So, I gotta ask this: being again growing up in New South Wales and not having footy as easily accessible, can you remember the first Hawthorn item that you were given or bought?
Yeah, Dad bought an old Hawthorn Guernsey for me. So they make the Guernseys obviously very small in terms of the size and the make. And when I grew up in Sydney, I played rugby, and so it was quite a big kid. But I remember Dad had sourced a Hawthorn Guernsey, which was made by Seacom at the time, and it had the old VFL logo on it. And that was one of my first ones I had. And I wore it to rugby training one day and came home and it was ripped. So it
Oh
was,
boy.
yep. Wasn't in the good books with mum and dad for a while there.
Oh boy, not never a good thing there. It's like no, so that's awesome. So, and the cool thing is we'll be able to discuss one of the reasons why I know how big a fan you are, and I love this question because I love people describing their fandom because I think fandom is such a unique thing because it's never the same amongst people. It's always different. Everybody fans differently. Everybody handles their fandom differently. So I always like hearing people. Can you describe your fandom of the Hawthorn Hawks to me? Because for me, from what are the things that I know of you, you seem like somebody that kind of lives and dies by the Hawthorn Hawks.
Yeah, it's probably grown over time. So growing up in Sydney, I was a fanatical Hawthorn supporter that got to see them once a year, if we were lucky, in a good year. And then I moved to Melbourne in 2012 when I met my wife, who's a Victorian. And since then, for me, it's been wonderful because I've been able to attend more games. My two daughters, when they came along, they were Hawthorn members before they were actually born. So my youngest one, who's 2.5, she's got a 4-year Hawthorn membership. So for those of you playing at home, you can see that. And then in terms of fandom, I've got, I think at the moment, I think it's about 25 Hawthorn Guernseys, so different Hawthorn Guernseys, whether they're player issued ones or just normal ones. Started a bit of a collection during the pandemic when I found that there was something that people did. But yeah, I really enjoy Hawthorn. I love talking about them. I love going to the games. And yeah, I guess for me, I'm pretty fanatical that way.
Yeah, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. So again, as you said, you grew up in New South Wales before you moved to Victoria. So can you remember the first Hawthorn game you attended live at the ground?
The first one that comes to memory is the one I was saying before, which was the 1996 elimination final against the Swans. There was probably other games that I had been to with Dad before, but that I just hadn't remembered, didn't sort of resonate. But that was the first one. And then from there, I think I can recall every SCG game against the Swans that Hawthorn played up until when I left. But then as I sort of got older and finished high school, I'd make the venture to the MCG once or twice a year as well. So I've got some very fond memories of those games.
Yeah, definitely for sure, and especially during that time period, you had a lot of good things to look at. So, Hawthorne's got a lot of history. So I love asking this question because it unfortunately with as a parent of you that has multiple children, I never like asking this question, but it really is. It's like choosing your favorite child. Do you have a favorite player of the past, and do you have a favorite player currently on the Hawks list?
My favorite player from the past is a person who was only at Hawthorn for 2 years, but I just loved the way he went about it. I loved that he was an unlikely bulky hero, had a different story, and it was Stuart Dew. So he started off at Hawthorn, came across in 2008 as an overweight ex-footballer who hadn't done much training and had been on the Swiss Alps skiing and so on and so forth, and then became a premiership hero with his exploits in the third quarter of the 2008 grand final. So I love that about Stuart Dew. He was this person that wasn't in the greatest of shape in terms of Aussie rules footballers, and was able just to turn it on the big stage, and I loved that about him. I thought it was brilliant. And then in terms of present, Chad Wingard would be my favourite at the moment. I love the flair he has. I love the way he goes about it. He's a wonderful person to talk to off the field. And then another one that I guess would be a favourite of mine would have to be Connor Nash because of his rugby background. And he's someone who's played rugby in the past and made it in Australian rules football, which is pretty difficult to do.
Yeah, makes tons of sense. A couple of some really good ones there. So, all right, I'll ask this question. And for you, as somebody that has seen many a premiership since you've become this may be a little bit difficult. What's your most memorable moment as a Hawks supporter?
I think winning the 2014 grand final was the most memorable moment for me as a supporter. We lost to the Swans in 2012, and
Hmm.
obviously being from Sydney, I was actually back in Sydney for that grand final. So I had a barbecue at my mum and dad's house with a few of my mates who were not Swan supporters until that day. And then obviously when the Swans won, copped a fair bit of grief from them. And then winning in 2014, it was very interesting. I'd send a text message and there was no response for at least a week afterwards. So it was a nice moment as a Hawthorn supporter. So the 2014 premiership where we won as the underdogs as such against a highly fancied Swans team, that would be my favourite moment as a supporter.
Yeah, not a bad one. As a Swan supporter who took a lot of grief that day from a few Hawks supporters who I knew, who I played with at the time up here. I know exactly the feeling that your friends probably went through. So we'll go to more present day. Enough of the past, which is fantastic. And again, you have so many great memories there. But let's go into this last season. And I know for as a Hawks supporter, this is an interesting one because this was the first year after Clarko. So I'm very fascinated. What were your thoughts on this year? Do you think that you saw the progression you were expecting, or were there a few more bumps? And was this a little more frustrating season than you expected?
I loved last season. I know Clarko had been at the club for a long time and had done some amazing things, but I actually love the approach of Sam Mitchell, where he
Mhm.
literally just went back to the drawing board, told the players to stick to their strengths, play to their strengths. Young squad, and gave them the opportunity and the license to be a bit freer in terms of ball movement, the speed and quickness they were able to move the ball, but then also seeing some of the young kids coming through, like your Jai Newcombs, your Connor Wards, your Connor McDonald's, your Josh Wards, absolutely wonderful. So while Hawthorn, we didn't make the 8 last year, I loved it in terms of the season, and very much looking forward to this season coming up.
Fantastic. So we go to it, and kind of the more recent nowadays is we hit off season, and again we you have player movements, different things like that. So do you keep an eye on that? And if so, what are your thoughts on this off season and even the draft so far?
Yeah, so I keep an eye on it. I guess when we lost Tom Mitchell and Jaeger O'Meara, who got traded out, that was going to be a big loss in terms of experience. Then we had Ben McAvoy retiring, Liam Shields retired, and then came out of retirement to move to North Melbourne under Alistair Clarkson. So we lost a ton of experience in terms of the off season, but some of the young kids we got through, like Cooper Stevens, I know is someone that Sam Mitchell had spoken about so highly and moved heaven and earth, and was actually able to get him 12 months earlier than they expected, which was wonderful for the club. Carl Amon came in as a unrestricted free agent, and yeah, he's someone who's incredibly classy, wonderful on the ground, but also off the ground in terms of leadership. He'll be able to add so much. And then we got someone of the caliber of Lloyd Meek, who is an absolute man mountain, who will do wonders in the ruck, especially for those younger midfielders that we've got. So in terms of the moves, I think we actually did really well. While it's a shame that we lost some of those players who had that experience, I think we gained some really wonderful young kids who are going to do some amazing things for us, not only in 2023, but onwards as well.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with you there. And I think Sam Mitchell really is kind of wanting to revamp from the old school that you had there a little bit, which you understand. Jaeger O'Meara is very talented, but I think moving him on and letting the Jai Newcombs and those really young players that I think really kind of stepped up as the season went on, I think was a great decision there. You get some capital for Jaeger O'Meara, and you open up spots for those young kids to have more time in the midfield. So I think I agree with you. I think Hawthorn actually did quite well in the off season for sure. So we go to it. I hate using the word expectations, which is really funny when I wrote this out because I put expectations and I really don't like it because I'm the eternal optimist. I hate having expectations. So what are your thoughts or expectations for next season? Do you see Hawthorn jump up the ladder? Do you think they stay kind of towards the bottom four and have another year of kind of building what Sam Mitchell is wanting? Or is it kind of you're just gonna kind of see how it goes?
I think Personally, I think we'll see improvement from the young kids. Like last year, we were 18th in clearances. We had one ruckman who was fit for most games. We had, Ben McAvoy was out with a fractured neck for the majority of it. Poor Max Lynch copped a bee sting, had COVID, concussion issues, the likes. So I think if all the players are fit this year, I can't see any reason why we don't sort of move up into about that 10th or 11th in terms of ladder positions at the end of the year. And I think also seeing them, it's their second season under Sam Mitchell. So in terms of that game plan, they've had another preseason to work on it and build on it. And as I was saying before, with the caliber of some of the people we've got in, I can only see improvement, which is a good thing, because as a supporter, you don't want to see your team down the bottom of the ladder for too long.
No, don't want to see those wooden spoons start to rack up at all. So 100% agree with you there. So I'm gonna let you have a little fun. We just talked about off-season moves, but there's always that part of me that loves the thought process of I'd love to be the guy making decisions. So I'm gonna have some fun here. I'm gonna install you as the list manager for Hawthorn for one day. You can make one move. You can bring in one player from any of the 17 teams in the competition. Who's that one player and why?
So the one player I'm going to pick is someone who actually hasn't played an AFL game yet, or someone who was drafted. And it would be Harry Sheasel. And the reason I bring in Harry Sheasel, who ended up in North Melbourne, is he's a lifelong Hawthorn supporter. Did some amazing things in the NAB League, which is the sort of the under 18s comp over here. And he's someone who would add to that Hawthorn forward line massively, and someone that we've been looking to replace Cyril with. He would be someone that you'd be able to put in, plug and play, basically. He's ready to go. I think if you put him in as a Hawthorn supporter, knowing that he was a Hawthorn tragic growing up, there's another one that would add to the list. So at the moment, I think we've got Jack Scrimshaw, Dylan Moore, Jai Newcomb, Josh Ward. There's about 6 or 7 Hawthorn fanatics who are now at the club playing for them. And you think if you build a club, you build these players at the club who love the club. They want to stick there. They want to see the good times. And so Harry Sheasel's the one that I would pick. So there you go. Someone who hasn't actually played an AFL game, but I just think for the romantic nature of it would be wonderful.
No, it's a clever thought process, and it does breed that, that because they grew up supporting it, that they're definitely going to try their best for it. So that's a clever one. I absolutely love that. That's fantastic. So I'm gonna do the next couple of questions are fun for me because I love hearing people's opinions on this. Is 2020 and 2021, we saw the grand final find its way outside of Victorian soil for the first time like ever. And I was surprised after 2021 how many Victorian media started kind of hinting that they didn't mind the idea of the grand final potentially becoming a traveling grand final. Again, caveat, I know about the 50-year contract. Comment section, calm down before we get going for just a second. This is pie in the sky. I know this is the 50-year contract, but as somebody, you live in Victoria now, so I know the grand final is usually used to being there. What are your thoughts on that thought process? Could you see potentially going to it, or are you kind of one of those, you want the tradition of it being at the MCG?
I personally, I'd love to see it held, I guess, at the MCG, only because it's got the biggest stadium capacity. So the way that it works, and being a Hawthorn member when we actually made 4 grand finals in a row from 2012 to 2015, I think it's something stupid in terms of there's 100,000 seats and there's about 20,000, 25,000 for each of the 2 competing teams. So there's 50,000 seats, and then the other 50,000 goes to corporates. So my thing would be, if you move it to, say, an Optus Stadium, which has 60,000, does that mean that corporates still keeps 30%, in which case you've then got 15,000 for each of the 2 competing teams? And if that's sort of how it worked out, if you look at clubs like Hawthorn, who had over 80,000 members last year, you look at your Richmonds, your Collingwoods, your West Coast, who have these ridiculously large numbers in terms of membership, you're then actually excluding some of those fans from being able to get to the grand final. And as a supporter, if it's your team who's made the big dance, you want to be there to see it. So I think in terms of having the MCG with that capacity of 100,000, for mine, I can't see it moving, because if you move it somewhere with a smaller capacity, you're actually robbing those fans of that opportunity to see it.
No, 100%. Like I said, I have no skin in the game. I don't know if I'm ever going to get to a grand final. It would be fantastic, but it's just interesting that that very much the Victorian media were starting to kind of bring it up, which was rather a little bit shocking. It was not something I'm used to them giving credit to interstate venues. So I thought that was fascinating. So, and also we'll stay in kind of the interesting thought process is this upcoming year. Gil McLaughlin was able to secure what they're going to call Gather Round. Again, whether the name is that elite, I don't know. It's basically Magic Round ripped off and with a new name tagged on it. So we're going to see all 9 games in South Australia. So as a Hawthorn supporter living in Victoria, do you have any interest in Gather Round? And if so, do you plan on going?
I actually like the concept of gather round. So besides being a Hawthorn supporter, I support South Sydney in the rugby league. And so they have the magic round for rugby league where they go and play. Obviously, in rugby league, it's a bit different. They play all 9 games. I think it is on the same ground over the course of 4 days. Whereas with gather round and the length of AFL games, they're going to be playing in different venues in South Australia. I love the concept of it. I think that works really well. It's something I'd love to take the girls to, probably when they're a bit older. At the moment, trying to travel with a 4.5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, it's not the most pleasant thing to do. But I think it's wonderful that the AFL's put in this concept, because if you can get people going to a different state and you can help to build in terms of brands and seeing different teams at the same time. I mean, if you're there for gather round and you make the tickets slightly cheaper than what they already are, you'd sit there and go, well, I always watch Hawthorn, but I might be able to go and watch a different team play, or so on and so forth. And then, all of a sudden you start to build the concept, which I think would be wonderful.
Yeah, I love the idea. My only worry that I've said to a few people is will the SA fans go to all of the games? Like, I know they'll go to the Port game. I know they'll go to the Adelaide game. I just worry that they won't go to the others. But everything that I'm hearing, it sounds like a lot of people in SA are super excited about it. Plus, they have some games in some of the SANFL game grounds, which I know some of the people around there are super excited to see AFL games on Sample grounds. So I think it's going to go well. I'm just very interested to see how the one, I think in the Barossa Valley, I think it's a little ways further out, how that one is attended. Cause I think the stadium there is only like 3,000. So I'm interested, will they sell that out? And then kind of how that one goes is kind of the only debatable one. So before I ask the next question, because I already kind of know the answer to this, because it's kind of how I connected with this gentleman here, is I want you to tell me about this. You have a podcast that talks about the AFLW and the Hawks. So just really quickly, can you tell us about that podcast before I ask this next question? Because I already know the answer to it. So I thought I'd let you have this chance to kind of plug your podcast and what you guys talk about.
Yeah, so our podcast is called Soaring to New Heights, and it was, I guess, an idea that came about from Liam, who's one of the other people I work with at Talking Hawks. So we had a bit of a chat when the AFLW started up and said, wouldn't it be nice to start up a podcast about the women's team, because we know that the men's team get a lot of coverage and a lot of traction. And we said, it's something that we'll sort of put down the track. So it was in the pipeline. And then school holidays, it would have been term 3 school holidays. I went into school to do some work and finished early and jumped on Google, and Dr. Google sort of knows everything, and said, how do you do a podcast? And it said, one of the first things that popped up was Anchor. So we started playing around with it. And what was the concept that we thought we'd use for season 8 of the AFLW season, which would be the second season for the Hawthorn team, we started playing around with it. And we've been really lucky. We contacted the Hawthorn Footy Club and got in touch with Julia, who's part of the communications team for the AFLW. And we've so far been lucky enough. I think we've had 10 of the 30 AFLW players come on our podcast and talk about not only themselves, but the games, about the coach, the culture, and where they see the AFLW moving to in the future. So we're really lucky to have had the club's support for that.
That is fantastic. Absolutely awesome. Because I have to say this is I've done a few women's player interviews. I've gotten lucky, have found some connections through social media, but unfortunately, I haven't had that luck when it comes to reaching out to the clubs. Some of the clubs have kind of done argued me a little bit, but I have had the luxury of talking with Steph Kiochi, Alicia Eva from GWS, and then a couple of Swans players since that's my team, and Daisy Bateman from North Melbourne, who now is with the Western Bulldogs. So, and I thoroughly enjoy talking to the women. I think they are fascinating people to talk with, and they have such great stories. So I love that you're doing that. So please keep it up. I subscribe to it. I listened to some of your latest episodes. I think you guys are doing a fantastic job. Keep up the great work. So, but I wanted to let you have that moment to talk about that, because everybody knows that listens to this podcast, I am a huge women's footy advocate. I really, really push it because I think these women deserve more publication and more communication, because I think this product is going to be a growth area for the AFL big time over these next 10 years, when we start seeing these women start getting more and more talent, and I think closer and closer to full-time pay. So I cannot wait for that. So I know you're an AFLW fan because you guys have a podcast. So your thoughts on last year's inaugural season for the Hawks?
Yeah, I think the girls did a tremendous job. So in terms of the season, the girls had 8 weeks from when the draftees had been picked up to when the first game occurred. So trying to build a culture, trying to build a team, trying to build connection was going to be really difficult. But they did an amazing job. They won 3 games out of the 10. They were really competitive in a few of the other games, so a couple of close losses. And up until round 9, we're still in contention for the finals, which is amazing for a team that literally came together with sort of 8 weeks to be able to play. And then, as you said, because it was their inaugural season, we were lucky. I got to be out on the ground with my eldest daughter, Evie, when the girls ran out for the first AFLW game. And just seeing the look of joy on her face was wonderful, because as a kid growing up, even though I wasn't the most talented, I still had that pipeline dream that one day I'd be able to play for Hawthorn. And up until this season, my girls didn't have that. So it was wonderful knowing that they now had an opportunity one day to be able to grow up and possibly wear the brown and gold while playing for Hawthorn. But then at the same time, as a Hawthorn supporter, it was wonderful having that women's team as well, because the club was complete.
Yes, absolutely love it. So I got to ask, do you have a favorite AFLW player?
My favourite would have to be Tamara Smith. She wears number 24 for Hawthorn. Absolute tackling machine. She was one of the first guests that we had to come onto our podcast. And I think she's tough as nails. She was talking to us about how she got recruited to Hawthorn, and it was sort of last minute in terms of recruiting, and then what she was able to achieve this year off a very limited preseason with the club was wonderful. And I think she'll go on to huge things next year. And then Evie and Penny, they've got 2 favourites. So they love Akesh. So Akesh wears number 34.
Mm-hmm.
And they love Akesh. Akesh has been wonderful. Every time she sees the girl, she signs their autograph, gets a photo with them, and has a chat. And then Evie loves Dom Carbone, because Dom wears number 4, which is the number that Evie wears on the back of her jumper. And Penny also loves Tilly Lucas Rod, who's our captain, who wears number 18.
Some really good ones there. I love Akash. I think her how she shows her culture, I think, is fantastic. But she's been absolutely fantastic. Good. I follow her on Instagram. I absolutely love what she puts out there. So it's absolutely great. So some great picks there. So I truly keep up the great work with that. I will definitely be keeping an eye on that. And I would love to work with you some more come this next up AFLW season, both you and Liam. I think it'd be fantastic to be able to work together. So, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be able to pull that off. So we will, as much love as I love the AFLW, I tell people I have not been to Australia. It is on my bucket list. It is on my list of things to do. I'm going to get it done. So I'm doing a little bit of research with these next couple of questions. So then when I go, I'm completely ready. As Americans, we love our food at sport. So I got to ask this: when you go to the footy, what is your go-to food when you go to the footy?
It has to be a meat pie. So in terms of the meat pie, pastry on the outside, mincemeat with gravy on the inside, and then tomato sauce on top. That's the go-to. we've got a book at home that says Reasons Why I Love Footy, and it's my youngest daughter's favorite book. She loves reading it. And in one of the pages, it's got all the different foods at the footy, and she'll tell you, mum likes hot dogs, and I like chicken nuggets and chips. And she'll get to the pie, and she goes, "Oh, big fella, he loves pies." And that's
Love
me.
it. Absolutely love it. That is fantastic. Fantastic. All right. I need to know this. When I go to the game, I want to have the best possible seat to see the game. Where is your ideal place to sit when you go to the footy?
So my ideal spot, I love sitting around the half forward flank, so near where the 50-meter arc is, and as close to the ground as possible, especially if you're at the MCG. So we went one Easter Monday, and we were sitting in that particular spot, and I think we were lucky enough to be sitting sort of the first row. So literally, where you are, you've got the fence, and then you've got the ground. And Josh Gibson put a block on one of the Geelong players, and literally the sound, and it was just that's what you're there for. And so so sitting as close as you can. And for me, I always love sitting around that half forward flank, because you get to see what's happening sort of in the midfield. You get to see them kicking in to where your forward 50 is, and then conversely, in the next quarter, you get to watch the defense. So that way, you get to pretty much see a bit of everything at the same time.
Awesome, awesome. And I always love ending my episodes with this, because I think this question always makes people think. And I love the thought process, because nobody is ever exactly the same. Favorite game of footy you have ever seen, whether live, on the telly, at the ground. Favorite game of footy you have ever seen.
Yeah, so the favorite game I've watched would be round 23, 2012. So I moved to Melbourne early in 2012. And then for that game, I headed back home with my then fiance. We headed back and caught up with my mum and dad, and Sydney and Hawthorn were playing at the MCG in the last round before the finals. And it was to see who would end up top spot on the ladder. And so we got to the game. We were sitting in the Hawthorn Bay, and there would have been probably about 2,000, maybe 3,000 Hawthorn supporters at the ground out of the 50,000 supporters who were there, because the Swans were obviously very good at the time. And Hawthorn were down by about 38 points midway through the second quarter, and we thought, yep, this is not going to end well. And then I think Hawthorn kicked 6 straight in about the third quarter. And then with a few minutes to go, we were behind. Sean Burgoyne kicks a 45-metre goal to put Hawthorn up by a point. And then Brad Sewell, who was never the quickest and never the biggest kick at Hawthorn, got a clearance, was able to muster as much speed in his legs as he could, and then kicked the ball from about 55 metres, and it sailed through. And Hawthorn ended up winning by 7 points. And it was this great come-from-behind victory against the odds. And for me, it was wonderful, because I was in my home state supporting my team, who was in their away state, and it was wonderful.
Fantastic. Absolutely fantastic there. Tim, this has been an absolutely fantastic chat. Even though I am a Swan supporter, you're a Hawk supporter. I like that we can have this chit chat, because I think honestly, their rivalry for that longest period of time was so much fun to watch. I still say the 2012 grand final, though it may not bring up great memories for you, was one of the reasons I became a Swan supporter. But I have to say this, I respected the heck out of the Hawks and what Clarko did, because that was magical watching them play footy for the longest period of time. So I want to thank you for hopping on the podcast here today.
No worries. Thanks very much for having me, Donnie. Really appreciate it. It's interesting you were talking about that 2012 grand final, because when I go through the history books, it says 2011 and 2013. I don't think I've ever seen the 2012 grand final.
You are not the first person to say that. And trust me, there's some friends of mine who I know that 2014 and 16 are quotes you can't do as a Swans fan, because they didn't exactly turn out well for the Swans there. So, but hey, this is the lovely banter that I absolutely love. It's absolutely fantastic. I genuinely appreciate it. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to do it for our episode today. Again, keep an eye out. We're continuing with more AFL, Waffle, Sandful, and VFL chats to get us to March, get us to the start of the AFL season, get us back to footy. Keep an eye on it. We'll be back again very, very soon.